Live. Welcome, welcome. I see all of you there chiming in. I am welcoming Jennifer Holik as my guest today and another first timer here on Substack Live. It's always kind of fun to
Yeah.
be the one to be introducing somebody new to Substack Live. And I have to say, that's kind of my secret plan doing these live sessions. It is fun. And I guess it's all of you chatting away, showing me you're here. That makes it so much fun. But we're in Zoom meetings. Why is this special? I can't put my finger on it. There is something very special to knowing where we all are just this very moment. And this kind of a session, also somehow on a weekend. Hello, Bill. Somehow on a weekend, it just seems a little more casual, a little more personal. And honestly, it just brightens up my weekends. You're all just here for that. So once again, welcome everyone. I'm Barbara Tien with Projectkin, and I'm delighted to have as a very special guest today, Jennifer Holik, who of Soul Traveler. You will know her for joining many of our conversations as we get to some of the serious topics. And she is such a sensitive, thoughtful, considerate person in our landscape of family history and genealogy. And I wanted to invite her here because of a special program we have this week in anticipation of the many memorials and remembrances of World War II that have been occurring in May and June and September this year, celebrating 80th anniversary of the end of the war, and the many other discussions that we had to that. And that is, of course, very serious, but I also want to enjoy the day as it is. So again, welcome everyone. It's been a delight to see you chiming in. I like to also use these sessions to give everyone just a quick update about what's coming for the week. But first, let me acknowledge just the amazing joy of everybody joining from New Zealand, Australia, New York. I think the good folks over in the UK and Britain are taking a little nap because it's late. It's late on a Sunday night. But it's good of you in New Zealand and Australia to be waking up early on a Monday morning to join us, and I appreciate that. Hi there, and Canada, and absolutely Canada are better neighbors. Kathy Stone and Linda Tether chiming in from Calgary, and Dr. Mary Marshall coming in from Washington, and Bill Moore coming in from New York. So you're all just testing me. And Lori Olson White always has something new for me. She is not in Minnesota, which she writes about a lot. She is not in Wyoming, but right now she's in a car crossing the border into New Mexico. Oh, I'm sorry, Dr. Mary. For some reason, I had you pegged as Washington. You are in New York. Forgive me. I did know that. I did know that. So welcome, welcome, welcome. So this week, we have two events for Projectkin, or rather, I guess one event for Projectkin and one event for Mission Genealogy, my alter ego. Mission Genealogy, a little plug here, is an idea that I came up to together with my good friend Robin Stewart to have a way to really share the nuts and bolts of getting along here in this land of Substack with tips and tricks. Hello, dear Myrtle, and welcome, welcome. Speaking of getting our feet wet in Substack. And once a month, we hold, all of us as Mission Genealogy, hold a office hours. And of course, everyone is welcome to come. And yeah, no, you don't have to be a member to come to our events, but we'd love to have you. And all of these are free anyway. It lets everybody stay together and access recordings, and most of all, continue the conversations as we go through all of these. So that is on Tuesday, and this month, our Tuesday programs for office hours will be at our Pacific friendly times of 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern, and the early mornings in New Zealand, Australia, even as far as Hong Kong. You never know who's going to show up for our programs. And then, of course, on Thursday, Jennifer was gracious enough to accept a scary offer from me to join for, I don't know, it just seems like a good idea. Let's try this program on Thursday. So, Jennifer, forget whatever it is I think I've made up and described in our agenda for Projectkin at projectkin.org/events, where they always are. Do you want to tell us a little bit about what you have planned for Thursday?
Well, Thursday, I plan to talk a little bit about putting a story together and ways that maybe you can pull pieces of those stories and create something different. And as we discussed, my specialty is writing. I am a storyteller that way, but you have other ways to tell stories. So I'm sure as we talk about this, you'll be able to say, hey, you could do that in this format or that format. And we're also going to talk about some of the things you should consider when you are telling some of these stories, like you really need to do the research because your veteran or your family may not really know the story, or it might not be 100% accurate. You also need to look at the historical context and maybe ways that you can work with your ancestors when they show up to help you write those stories. So that's just a little bit.
Yeah.
And then I will end the program um, with a story, a part of a story that I wrote, and you might want tissues nearby for that.
Yeah. Well, just for the record, I'm never against writing.
I know.
Writing is like thinking, in my view. It's the operating system. It's thinking. Um, and I talk a lot about telling stories in many different forms because I tend to think that the rigor of writing intimidates a lot of people from
Yeah.
getting to the real story. And I think the crime is when the stories are lost because people didn't feel able, willing, comfortable telling their
Yeah.
stories. And yes, thank you, Mert. Our ancestors want to have their stories told.
Mhm.
I have to say, I'm so excited. I just through the magic of SEO, had one of my stories recently, my 16s story, was found by a distant cousin who contacted me. We share a 2X great grandfather, so not that far back. And there was a story about our common, well, my grandfather, great grandfather, that same great grandfather, who died by being crushed by a rolling ball of hay
Oh,
in Switzerland in 1850 or maybe 1851. So what about that story? It's a kind of fantastical story. You're like, what? Did that happen? And I think it's so we're sorting that out. That's exactly right. Cousin bait. Who knew? And any of these kinds of stories, and especially stories of trauma, of
mhm.
danger, of national events, of major, roles and major experiences, protests even, um, become family lore. That's important because those stories get passed down. It's also important to get the facts because they, like rolling hay, start compounding of erroneous information. And sometimes that erroneous information can be uh, deeply disturbing and make a lot of things much worse than necessary
Right.
to get stories told. So you've been writing in your art of choice is writing. So tell us a little bit about that process and how you go about it.
Well, I've been doing this about 15 years now. And actually, my first book, I was only ever going to write one book, and now I'm more than 20 and countless client books. But I had a bucket list. I was going to do one book after I started my genealogy business 15 years ago and write about my cousin Robert Braug, who was a flying tiger, one of the American Volunteer Group. And Robert came back from China in 1942 when the Tigers were disbanded, and the guys had to join up to the Army Air Corps instead of just being volunteers for Chenol. And he came back to Chicago. He was a big hero, and he met Virginia Scherer. And they got married in the end of November 42. He's back in Orlando training pilots instead of being shipped overseas right away. And 3 weeks after they get married, she watched him die in a plane crash. So because Robert was not in most of the Flying Tiger stories, I felt his story needed to be told.
Mhm.
And his widow, Virginia, by the way, 4 months later, when she turned 21, joined the Women's Army Corps. And I ended up writing her story as well. She's 103 now. Yeah.
Wow.
But when I wrote his story, all my other ancestors who died in war showed up and said, if you wrote about him, you need to write about us. And by the way, figure out how to do it because everybody thinks the record's burned. So, in a sense, a lot of the writing that I've done has come just because I wrote that one book. And my ancestors showed up and said, here is your mission. So, my business actually went all from genealogy to military within 2 years. And the focus was to tell the stories of those who no longer could tell their own stories. That was a big focus. And then to teach people, well, how do you do that?
Right. Right.
And so that's been a whole process. And then because of my own spiritual journey and the ancestors helping with that, once I met my late Dutch husband, all of the inherited trauma that my World War II grandparents experienced and their unfinished business and dreams that my grandmother had that were unfulfilled all started showing up in a very decontextualized manner. And so then, between genealogy and military research, using different tools, investigating, writing, I did a tremendous amount of journaling the last 10 years, trying to figure all this out, which then has led to other books that I'm writing to tell that story. But
Mhm.
none of this happens, whether you're doing the research or the writing or you're trying to figure out the family trauma, none of it happens quickly.
Yeah.
It's all a process and you have to let it unfold layer by layer. Otherwise, your mind, your nervous system can't handle it.
You describe it as such an organic process, and maybe it's just because I'm a gardener, but I see I see you describing this as like you can't rush a rose to bloom. You
Hmm.
can't rush a crop to grow. You have to give it the time and the nutrients and, the context.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. So often it is those and I can't help you, you've talked about Amsterdam, you've talked about the Dutch side and the extraordinary role of Holland in World War II and the
Hmm.
complexity of all of that. I can't help but think about place and how that feelings we don't have words for this stuff.
Yeah. There's a lot
How
of energetic feelings.
and energetic in a different meaning, not
Hmm.
energetic as in a toddler, but energetic
Right.
as is energy, that, you need to try to understand and pull through. I am in awe. I'm just in awe of that process, how you do it, how you describe it. Um, a w How do you see your role here in what we're doing on Substack as a shared community?
One of my goals with the military work is to help people not only understand how to do the research, so I do write about that, but also looking at your family history and trying to figure out where are you carrying that trauma? Where are you reliving the beliefs, behaviors, patterns, regardless of
Mhm.
it, whether it's war, it's something cultural, it's something else that happened, 200 years ago. How can you begin to look at that? What tools can
Mhm.
you use? And then what do you do with that when you have it? And then how can you maybe write that story, produce that video, make a podcast, whatever, and then share that and, in a sense, kind of pay it forward, but also your story will probably help somebody else heal something.
That moment of having that story, and now what are you gonna do about it? To me is
Mhm.
just 'cause it's not just us. It's the people we talk to who've, just been waiting for somebody to ask these questions.
Right.
Um, I had the opportunity to see again, just this last week, a dear friend who's also 103, sharp as a tack,
Yep.
and, just scratch for those little tiny stories that are breathtaking to hear,
Yeah.
and, you're like, "Can I please record this?" it was dinner. It was awkward. My husband with me. At least I had that. um, but listening. Exactly. Thank you, dear Mert and Kathy. It is about listening, but it's more than that. I mean, it's not just any kind of listening. Talk to us about that. Talk to us listening.
Well, one of the things with listening, especially if you're interviewing somebody, family member, or I'll tell you this story. So, in the summer of 2023, I had been too much by myself. My kids had graduated high school and I was too much alone. And they had been living with their dad half the time anyway, but I was totally an empty nester. And I decided I needed to get out of the house. So I took a part time job at a local senior center over here at the Park District. And it turned out to be a little more than part time job. But there was a World War II veteran there named Ray. And he had a lady friend named Luann or Lucille. Sorry. And a couple months after I started, Lucille passed away unexpectedly. And I had already wanted to talk to Ray and kind of hear his story because all I knew was he was in the Army Air Force during World War II. And he is like the most famous person at the senior center. Okay. So he
Thank God
is.
that works.
He's so
Charming.
bubbly and wonderful. Um, so when Lucille died, he came to my former boss and I had to leave last year because my business took a whole different turn and I couldn't balance both anymore. But he wanted to do a little memorial celebration of life for her. And at that point, I kind of felt this connection of like, I really need to keep an eye on him. He's 99 right now. On July 31st, he's going to be 100. And he's just a treasure. So I started spending a little more time with him, making sure, are you eating enough? Are you going to show up at the senior center? Because we didn't want him to be home alone. He still drives. And in February of 2024, I said, hey, could I come over? Can I see your pictures from World War II? Can we talk? He's like, oh, yeah, no problem. Before I left that morning, I kept hearing, you need to bring your book, Stories of the Lost, and you need to bring your laptop. And I'm kind of arguing with my spirit guides or whoever's talking to me. And I'm like, okay, Ray is not going to want to read my book. And I almost walked out without my laptop, but I did take it. I left the book at home, though. He shows me his pictures. We talk. I see his uniform, all this. And then I said, let me show you a few of my ancestors that died in the war and that I've written about. So I pull up my computer. I tell him about Bob Brock, the Flying Tiger. And then as I'm talking about him, he's like, oh, I had a cousin that died in the war. I said, really? And I said, well, what was his name? Because I thought I'll get his death file. I'll, give him some information. And he said, Winkler. And all of a sudden, my spidey senses went off because Winkler is a very common German name and a Czech name. But I said, oh, really? What was his first name? And he said, Frank. And now I'm like, oh. And so I kept asking questions. I said, okay, what did Frank's father do? Or what was Frank's father's name? Frank. What did he do for a living? He ran the butcher shop. They lived upstairs on the butcher shop. I go into my files on my laptop and I pull up this picture of my cousin Frank Winkler, who, by the way, I wrote a story about in my book, Stories of the Lost, that I left at home. And Ray looks at the computer and then he looks at me like, how do you have a picture of my cousin?
Wow.
I'm like, because he's my cousin too. So then we opened up the genealogy database and we kind of figured out how were we related because I didn't have Ray in there. So we're related by marriage, but we're still family. But sometimes it's the art of asking the question and not just saying, hey, was his dad Frank? Did they live in Cicero? Da-da. Because you don't want to plant a memory or trigger something that isn't actually there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
listening and asking those questions is so important because you never know what's going to happen when you do that.
That's so right. And it's also there's a respect there,
Yeah,
because someone's story that is completely unrelated to yours is still every bit as powerful and vibrant and, important as if they
exactly.
are related to you.
Yep.
and sorting through and opening those doors. And that's so much of what we do. And it sounds as though you have this magic spidey sense that most of all, I think you've learned to listen to. And speaking of listening, you've learned to appreciate that for what it is and let it
Yeah.
take you where it needs to go. Wow, I'm excited. Speaking of where we need to go, I'm very excited for Thursday. I'm very excited for a new week ahead. I was late last week flew to Southern California to attend funeral services for an old classmate of my husband's, old friend of his. He knew for well over 50 years, and very sad to lose someone at such a young age, but had the joy of seeing an old friend at 103, and just making these kinds of connections and opening up new worlds. And it just is such a
Mhm.
reminder that closing some doors opens other doors, and that all of us are here for such a short period of time, and making the very most of every moment, and how we can help others learn from those little tiny moments that we have is just key. So with
Mhm.
that, I want to be extra careful of the time that we do have. Do any of you in our chat there have questions and feedback for us to share? Well, all those flying hearts are a thrill. Thank you. See what I told you, this is fun. I don't know why, but I can't argue with it. It is fun. Thank you so much. I again keep it short and sweet. I want to thank you both. Thank you and all of you in the chat thread for joining us today. I'm excited for the week ahead. I'm excited to have you as a guest, and I think there's going to be so many new ways in which we can start to interweave as a community, and get more of these stories told, because that's what
Mhm.
matters, right?
Yeah.
Again, thank you. Thank you all.
Yay.
I'll post this right away so that everybody can get that, and then be updating the link. You all know that I do that, right? So it goes out right away, and then I update the link as soon as I get a chance to see the recording and pop in links to the things that we've been talking about, and refresh it again. So do a refresh if there's nothing else in the recording. Thank you all. Talk to you soon, and I'll see you on Thursday, if not sooner.
Bye.
Bye-bye now. Bye. Thank you.